So one big step in creating faster growing trees would be, okay, we have to engineer better genetics, and we do that at the cellular level. But then somehow we have to turn that cell back into a tree.
Iram, happy holidays. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Happy holidays to you. It's been quite a fun holiday season.
Yeah, we want to welcome all listeners to the Grow Everything show where we discuss biology as technology. And this is our holiday episode. It will run after Christmas. But tell me what is going on in your world right now.
We just celebrated my 14-year anniversary, my husband and I.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
What did you guys do to celebrate?
So we went to see Stranger Things, the first shadow on Broadway.
Oh, amazing. How was that?
It was insane. So I just watched it last night, so I'm still feeling it. It was so theatrical in every single sense. The actors were amazing. The set design was incredible. Every special effect that they have in this show, they somehow recreated on stage.
Amazing.
And it was so immersive. They had this one scene where the mind flare comes out and it's like this projection, this 3D projection. So it goes over the audience. And
oh my
I
God.
swear I went into the upside down, Carl. The mind flare is in my brain. I can open up the portal to the upside down now. I have the powers now.
And correct me if I'm wrong, the Stranger Things on Broadway is actually a prequel to the first season of the show, right?
Yes. It's about Henry Creel, who's Vecna, and how he ended up getting his powers. And I don't want to, this is not a spoiler alert, like you can sense it, but the reason he gets powers is because the US military did these experiments when he was a child. And what they were trying to do was create like an invisibility shield around a Navy ship and like it end up breaking into another dimension. And then the people on that ship were like affected by these powers. And then one of those military people escaped like the military compound and interacted with Henry Creel somehow when he was a child. And then he kind of got possessed and had those powers. But it was amazing because a lot of the cast are the adult cast in the current season, but in the show, they are in high school. And so they have similar stories. There's like an AV nerd, like it's every character that is in the current season on TV. They're like older cast members are the kids in the actual show. And it's well done. The acting, it has like a lot of Tony nominations.
Amazing.
But I recommend anyone to go see it because it's one of the most amazing shows with all of the things in terms of set design, storyline, music. And then it was made by Netflix, right? So
yeah,
Netflix, they have to be getting into Broadway. After they did this, I believe Stranger Things, the Broadway show started in London first and then came to New York. But it was such an incredible extension from the television series to Broadway.
That's amazing.
All of the feels, the nostalgia, the drama, the excitement, the high school angst, everything.
That's hilarious. Yeah, I haven't gone to the theater in a very long time. So yeah, you give me a bit of FOMO.
Yeah, well, Carl, shame on you, first of all, because you live in New York City area. It's like the one thing, like people live in New York and they never leave. Why? Because there's so much entertainment and excitement happening all around you.
That's true. But I make up for it by going to and watching movies and hopefully seeing more live music.
Yes. Oh, that's really good too. But yeah, take Kristen to see Stranger Things on Broadway. And listeners, just go. Netflix is not sponsoring this podcast right now, but maybe they will. I don't know.
Yeah,
eventually.
Who knows? Yeah.
But I know you've been busy. You've been going down a sci-fi rabbit hole recently.
Well, so for some reason, talking about Netflix has all the Star Trek reboot movies on. And so I've been watching one after another. I think I've probably seen the first one, the first of the reboots, the J.J. Abrams movie, I don't know, probably 10 times. I'm super, anytime it's on, I watch it. I never get tired of it. I don't think I was that big of a Star Trek series fan. When they come on, I'll watch them. But for some reason, the movies really resonate with me. But I will say, in all the Star Trek movies, I mean, we could probably say this generally, the Star Wars movies as well, none of them has very much biotech in them. So that is
Mhm.
very much missing. I think the only time that biotech gets mentioned in a science fiction show that I can think of right now is in The Expanse, where they talk about someone who's a synthetic biologist and there's like an environmental collapse on some asteroid where all these people are living. But generally, we still have a ways to go in terms of mainstreaming biotech so that more people understand it. But that's what we're doing here with Grow Everything. And this is our holiday, post holiday episode. So we want to give a holiday greetings to all our clients, our friends, and family, and just say thank you so much for listening, for interacting with us, for being a part of our world.
Yes. And then today's episode, we are doing a holiday replay of Ashley Beckwith, who was on the episode. We mentioned her in our commentary recently because her and her company, at Foray Biosciences, they've been doing a lot of science communications, looking at how to create seeds.
I was introduced to Foray a couple of years ago when I went down this rabbit hole of companies that are producing wood without the trees. And I got very interested in Foray because when they came out of MIT, that's what they were focused on. But then they kind of pivoted to really becoming more a plant biology, AI, and process engineering company to make it easier for people to access plant molecules, materials, and seeds that are grown from plant cells. And Ashley is a super interesting, compelling science communicator. She's the founder of Foray, and she'll tell us why they're doing what they're doing and why it's exciting.
The reason we're doing a replay of Ashley is because focusing on trees, the holiday, the biggest thing is a Christmas tree. There's a lot of fern trees out there. And we're like, okay, this is a great spin to the holidays. But we also wanted to give her another shout out because besides doing amazing science communications, they also joined the Founders Factory and Rio Tinto's Mining Tech Accelerator to pioneer fabricated seeds for mine site regeneration. So that's some news from one of our friends of the pod. Yes, very amazing. We love to see progress and growth, and we love to share that here on Grow Everything. So with that, let's let Ashley Beckwith take it away.
All right. Ashley Beckwith, Foray Bioscience. We're so happy to have you on the Grow Everything podcast.
It's so good to be here. Thank you for welcoming me onto your show.
We're going to get into what Foray does, but first we wanted to just kind of set the stage and get into some background. You actually grew up in Colorado. I lived in Colorado for a while. It's a beautiful place. And you saw the forest disappear. First of all, what part of Colorado?
Yeah, I grew up on the Front Range, and so front and center, where all the action is, a lot of housing development. Every time I go back, it feels like a different place that I'm returning to.
Yeah, it's crazy, actually, when you go out there. Like, I went to grad school in Boulder and used to commute to Denver, and that whole Boulder to Denver road was empty back then, and you could sometimes see wolves running across the plains in the morning when you're on the bus, and that is all gone. So you watch the forest disappear. And how did that shape your relationship with plants and with nature? And how did that lead to founding Foray?
Yeah, I mean, I think in my early life, I moved from the desert of Arizona to the forest of Colorado. And so that was just like a rude awakening for me and my first introduction to like forests and trees. And I was just so in awe of these forest ecosystems. And so I spent a lot of my childhood running around in this forest in my backyard. And not long after I'd really come to love this place, the housing development started moving in. These forests that I played in every day were starting to get ripped out from behind our house. And it was challenging to watch. As a kid, I really wanted to do something. I would scheme with my friend, try to figure out how can we stop this from happening? But we really felt like we had no agency being children in that stage of our lives. So just watching this destruction take place was really formative for me and had reverberating effects into my later life. And then, of course, being an inhabitant of Colorado, you become really familiar with the concept of gigantic wildfires coming through and wiping out a lot of the forests. And many of those that I saw burn also have never recovered. And so it's just been this really transformative thing to watch over the course of my life and my experience there. That lingering motivation and problem space is something that drove me ultimately into this founding of Foray and still is the basis of the problem that we want to solve.
Wow. Yes. I'm excited to share more. We shared with our audience a little bit about Foray in the intro. I would love to know a little bit more about your background. I can imagine you as a child going to stop this big corporation on your bike, like a Stranger Things gang, like just like riding your
Yes,
bikes.
exactly.
Pesky kids trying to save the world
Yeah.
from the upside down. We need those kids now because we live in the upside down as we watch the news. But
Yeah.
so you've had this early passion for forests, for plants. And despite that, you trained as an engineer. So can you tell us more about your path and how your engineering background gives a unique perspective in solving the problem of forestation or leveraging plants?
Yeah, I think exposure is a big factor in my early life. I didn't know anybody that worked with plants or with forest systems. And so I couldn't even conceive of a path to this world where I could have an impact on these systems. But also in my years growing as a young adult, someone in my family was diagnosed with breast cancer. And that also hit me really deeply. And I felt whatever I do, I want to have impact on people and help those that are not in a position to help themselves in this moment. And so I found myself going down this path towards medicine. And I don't have the stomach to be a doctor. So I wound up in this field of engineering and medical research at the intersection of biomedical and mechanical engineering. And so I spent many hours in a lab working with cells of the mammalian variety and materials and understanding how they interact and how we can build better systems to create better medical outcomes. And worked in the medical device world for a little while before finding my way to MIT, where I did my graduate studies. And ultimately, my master's degree was focused on building these little microchips where we could insert small pieces of tumor biopsy from an individual and test out different personal cancer treatments on those and evaluate the response to try to move towards a more personalized cancer therapy format. After my master's, though, I abruptly changed course. I had a moment to pause and reflect. And, it was not quite a midlife crisis. I call it a quarter life crisis. I went off to the farm and worked on a permaculture farm for a little while and started to see, and it just rekindled my passion for plants. And I started to see how these really intentionally designed collaborative systems between humans and plants and animals could be fruitful for everybody involved. And so it just started me on this path of thinking about the ways that we interact and engage with our plant systems and how could we redesign this engagement with them to be more regenerative and less extractive as a whole. So I came back to MIT with these thoughts bubbling in my head and posed this sort of thought experiment, what could we do if we could grow differently? And so inspired by shortages of things we see in the medical space. For example, we have a shortage of kidneys for kidney transplants. And there's this interesting area of work where people are focused on, how can we grow more kidneys without just having to harvest them from more people, which is obviously comes with a lot of undesirable consequences. So this field of tissue engineering bubbled up, and that was really active at the time when I was studying. And with that in my mind, I thought, what if we had sort of organ or tissue engineering alternatives for our plant system so we could grow what we needed in a really targeted way? And so I launched into this thought experiment, this what became a physical experiment, I guess, in lab-grown wood to apply these tissue engineering concepts and use cells, the sort of fundamental building blocks of life that we all sort of learn about through our high school biology classes, and use those to actually build wood outside of the tree. And so that just opened the door to this really interesting line of research that I explored for a number of years. I continued to be enthralled by this question of, if you could redesign any plant process and shape it from the cell up, what could become possible? And so lab-grown wood was sort of one example of that, one teaser of what might be possible in that space.
I guess looking at lab-grown wood probably comes with benefits, pros and cons. And given that forests are so beautiful and so necessary, and there's this whole concept of rewilding the forest, with trees, and we started to learn about your pivot and how things have changed. But maybe you can give us, what is the current Foray elevator pitch? What's your mission, in a sentence or two?
I'm going to cheat a little bit and I'm going to give some more background before I'll give you the 2-sentence summary at the end. But the lab-grown wood really opened the door to, or opened our eyes to some of these other challenges that stood between us achieving this vision of growing only what we need and where we were today. So it really got us started thinking about, there's this concept of problem progression. So you have this massive problem that needs to be solved, a big hairy problem that needs to be solved. But before you can solve that problem, you actually have to solve a series of smaller problems that come before it. So an example would be like, if you want to invent Uber, the first problem you have to solve is, okay, well, how do we make the internet? So there's this series of problems that need to be solved. And so lab-grown wood is sort of like the Uber. And through that process, we sort of recognized, okay, well, the internet doesn't exist yet. So now we need to build the internet. So that's kind of what led us to a renewed thinking about where we're building and why. So the real problem that we're passionate about today is that 40% of plant species are threatened with extinction, and humans are a driving cause of that. So we need these new ways to collaborate with plants to ensure long-term access to these plant products and plant ecosystems that we rely on. So at Foray, we grow harvest-free plant products straight from the cell so that we can precisely grow exactly what we need. So that's molecules, materials, seeds, and equipping us all as humans to take less and plant more to support this health of these systems that sustain us. So our secret sauce is figuring out new ways to design this growth economically and quickly so that we can get these approaches out the door a lot faster. And we do this with the help of some of our internally designed tools, a software co-scientist that's specifically built to help us navigate this complex world of plant science. And so we use this tool internally to power development work with partners, building better access to plant products. And we're also in the process of rolling the software tool out for broader use by growers in biomanufacturing, propagation, and regeneration. So that's a long answer. And the short answer is, in summary, we build things with plant cells, and we're good at figuring out how to build things with plant cells, and we can help you be good at it too. So that's the 2-sentence summary.
So we've also seen, this company Living Carbon that I think you probably know. They're focused on helping grow trees faster, and you guys are more focused on the cell side of plants in general. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. Cells are sort of a fundamental input to all of these processes. So whether you want to grow a whole tree faster or whether you want to grow just a part of a tree without having to grow the whole tree, cells are really like the building block of this life. And so one big step in creating faster growing trees, especially in the case of Living Carbon, would be, okay, we have to engineer better genetics. And we do that at the cellular level. But then somehow we have to turn that cell back into a tree. And that process of going from cell to tree, we call it regeneration. It's a huge barrier in delivering a lot of these improved, more resilient crops into the world. And so that's part of the process that we're looking to make a lot easier with our systems, and by building this more robust and holistic understanding of plant science and plant processes.
Walk us through what this looks like from a visual standpoint in terms of using plant cells for production, because recently we had Elon Sobel of BioHarvest and we had Michael Hilton of Exozymes, and they're producing molecules, plant molecules from either fermentation or salt-free manufacturing. Can you paint us a picture of what Foray is doing in comparison to them and what it looks like? Like, what does it look like from a visual standpoint?
Yeah. A lot of people operating in this space are producers. They're like delivering the product at the end. But the process of like getting to that product involved a lot of trial and error and research and development and money and investment. And eventually they were able to generate this successful process. And so Foray is sort of, we're not building products, the scale of the products, but we're building that sort of process. But when we think about cells and cell systems, we're sort of zooming out a little bit further from just this molecular production space. So the plant cell is this incredibly versatile agent of production. So the plant cell contains all the information necessary to create any part of that plant or any product of that plant. So right now in biomanufacturing, you often see this one mode of production where the cell is used as a factory. So you isolate the cell from the plant. You grow up a bunch of these cells in a sort of disorganized collection. You can feed those cells with nutrient broth in a bioreactor. And then you can turn on the internal machinery in those cells to pump out certain molecules of interest. So we see this as like, this is the cells as factories model. But at Foray, we also see a couple of other models of using cells as agents of production. So the second would be using cells as the physical building blocks for what materials, for delivery or packaging of sort of internal components. We see, other companies in plant cell culture playing around in this space. We've obviously done some work in lab-grown wood in the past, but we also see people working on fiber production and beyond. This would be the cells as building blocks model. And then the third mode of production would be these cells are actually the foundation for creating a whole plant or creating a seed, which is a precursor to that whole plant. And so we see these cells as regenerators as well. So once you're starting from this cell, it's really kind of like, quote unquote, a stem cell. It has all this developmental potential and you can steer it across all these different directions. So a lot of people are specialized into one of these production processes, and they're focused on the, how do you go from 1 to 100? How do you scale this and get this out into the world? And at Foray, we're asking the questions, okay, how do we get from 0 to 1? And how do we do that faster so that the people who are really good at getting it from 1 to 100 can really thrive and get these products out into the world?
Wow. Yeah. Thanks. That really helps clarify, how you're different in this world of biomanufacturing. And this is our first time meeting, and I didn't do as much research as I should have, so my apologies, but it's like, wow, I'm starting to think of the possibilities. I know Carl is, but Carl, please. I mean, I know you and I have a hive mind and have similar questions, but go for it.
Yeah, so on one level, what you're saying is, using that Uber analogy, being able to take cells and grow wood, that would be, I guess the Uber, and what you guys are doing is really using the tools that would enable that. So we're not going to get a lab-grown desk anytime soon, which I'm okay with, unless it's going to be like a special shape or, some kind of rare wood, rare woods. But what do you think people should be paying attention to in this space? Like, what's exciting? What are the big challenges?
Yeah, I think what's exciting about this space in general is the potential of plants and plant cells. I think biotech tends to focus a lot on the microbial space or mammalian world where things are a little bit more developed, but plants have so much potential and they have this developmental range that we can produce from the same source cell. We can produce a wide variety of products as opposed to engineering a microbe to produce one thing really well. And so I think these are really interesting and complementary tools. And it's exciting to me to start seeing plant cell and tissue culture getting more attention and traction as a complementary tool in the toolkit of biotech. Plant systems are so varied and the outcomes are so varied, or the needs are so varied. And so we have, even though there's a lot of people working in this field, you have some people working over here building new access to bioactives and medicines for, cosmetics and health and beauty. You have people over here working on fabricated seeds. You have people over here working on new propagation systems for a particular plant. And this knowledge that we're developing is really valuable, but it's so distributed and so dispersed and disconnected that we're not like productively moving forward in the way that we could. So there are a lot of people like banging their heads against these different walls. And it turns out, we're all banging our heads against the same wall. And so if we could see that, we could start to connect that learning, that knowledge, and give it context, we could all start sort of moving in the same direction, rowing in the same direction, and getting where we need to go a lot faster. And so that's part of the problem that we're trying to solve is like, how do we take this research on, how do we create rosewood oil from a cell culture instead of harvesting it from this endangered tree? And this other research on, okay, well, how do we propagate rosewood so we can restore these systems to the forests where they live? Well, it turns out, both of those biological systems, those sets of biological knowledge are related. So what if we could bring those learnings together and create a more comprehensive understanding of cellular processes and thus achieve better sort of control?
you need to be the one who organizes the conference that brings all these disparate minds together so that you guys all know what is going on, and then you can make like a 10-year plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's easy for us to say.
Yeah, no, this is exactly what we're passionate about doing, and creating this like software platform that can help to bring context to data, that can help bring additional understanding to the data that's been developed in the past, and help us like fill in the gaps that exist so that we can be more productive as a field in the future. And so that's one thing that we're really excited about, this software co-scientist tool and R&D management tool that we're about to roll out.
Yeah. So then we can walk us through a case study. So talk to us about the possibilities. You talk to us about the rosewood. So how does Foray play into this? You mentioned, there's a wet lab component to this as well, or a manufacturing component. Walk us through a case study. And if you want to use rosewood oil, that's fine, or something else that you're very excited about, or maybe you're working on today.
Yeah. We have a number of active projects today that I'm really excited about, that really showcases the versatility of this process-oriented mindset to developing these cell culture systems. So one is, we're working with a nonprofit out in California that is focused on preserving the biodiversity that exists in the state of California. And there are some species that have been, recently extinct out there, again, wiped out by encouraging housing developments. And so we're working on a path to reintroduce those recently extinct species into the wild by creating a seed from a limited amount of plant material that is still available. So we take this plant material, we generate the cells, we turn those cells into embryos, and then we encapsulate those embryos in a sort of nutrient pocket. So in effect, it's a fabricated seed. We have the biological component, which is destined to become the plant, and we have the package of food to get that embryo through its early days of life until it starts photosynthesizing for itself. And so we're building this pathway for de-extinction through fabricated seeds to be able to reintroduce these species to the wild. So this is one sort of case study, and one thing that becomes possible when we are able to bring this type of technology efficiently to a species where we don't have a lot of plant material or resources to play around with. This is a rare species, so you kind of have to get it right from the beginning, because you don't want to waste these resources. So that's where engineering a better process for approaching this will help us be really strategic.
I want to unpack that a little bit more. Like, my favorite class in grad school was plant cell and tissue culture. So, I was lucky enough to actually work with plant cells and grow them on Petri dishes. And, you could control the media so that you would, either get roots or you would get leaves. But you're talking about doing that on, a level where either you can take the plant cells and grow seeds from them. What does that look like in practice? And maybe without giving away too much information. Am I getting it right? Like, you would basically do plant cell tissue culture, but maybe you're manipulating the cells in a way that you're going to get seeds?
Yeah. So if you imagine sort of that cell lives on this landscape of sort of developmental opportunity. So from that quote unquote stem cell, we could nudge that cell. Like in your studies, you would have nudged that cell in the direction of root formation. So you're convincing that cell through these external signals to become a root cell, or you can convince that cell to become a leaf cell, or to just continue to persist as this undefined cell. But you can also push that cell to become an embryo, which is the precursor to a seed. And an embryo basically just has this dual ability to form both the roots and the leaves from the same sort of biological mass. So it's on the same landscape of development where you would have played before. Why we're excited about this is seed supply is a huge barrier when it comes to achieving our ecological restoration goals. So in the US Forest Service is usually only about restoring about 6% of post-wildfire restoration sites. And a big part of that is that we don't have the seed to do that, to actually meet those planting goals. And so how can we create access to seed when that seed just like it doesn't exist or it's so impractical to collect that we don't have access through natural processes. So we're focused on taking a limited amount of biological material. So we can take cells from, a little plant biopsy, we can take cells from a handful of seeds and turn those into these embryos, which can make many more seeds. So we can amplify those seed stores and make sure that restoration takes place in a time frame where it's still able to be effective.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's really incredible. Like the idea of creating seeds and this application for creating more biodiversity in California to restore lands that have been, ravaged by wildfires, which is such a huge issue. And then I also think about being able to maybe take it a step further, a little bit, wild in terms of plants that are extinct, thinking about, how to de-extinct them, the whole colossal world that they're focused on animals. Plants, I think, are a little bit more, they're all interesting, but maybe more accessible or just makes more sense or easier, not easier. That's all hard. And then and it reminds me of also Revive and Restore, which I'm sure that group well.
Yeah.
So that's cool. The California making these seeds to enable biodiversity. Is that the kind of the main vertical? But you said you get different projects. How else can we leverage the creation of seeds? And yeah, I'd love to learn more.
These plants, this extinction is happening like now. Yeah. And like, how do we save these species that provide us value today and won't be here tomorrow? And so I think the opportunity to act before, it's 20,000 years later is really compelling, but it does force people to have to really appreciate these resources on like an individualized level. We have a lot of like plant blindness, like, I still see a lot of green outside. But the health of those plant systems is totally dependent on this population, community level collection of these various species that sort of self-reinforce and like create this positive environment for all of them. And so even though there's green outside, it doesn't mean that it's a healthy ecosystem. And being able to implement these seed technologies to that end is really exciting to us. But in terms of other verticals, so our sort of internal passion project is these fabricated seeds, and we're looking for more opportunities to build and deploy in this space. But we also do contracted work with partners in other sectors as well. So as I said, we're like process builders. We build from 0 to 1, and we help people discover these new ways of producing goods that we depend on every day. So we have another client in the fiber products world where we're thinking about how could we build bio-better fibers that don't have to be necessarily harvested from trees if that supply becomes constrained, but could also have better and superior performance so that we could use less overall. So this is another interesting line of work. We have done additional work in the production of bioactives or fragrances from a species where we would also alternatively have to like tear down the tree and chop it up and extract it in chemicals. So just creating these new pathways and really exploring the full realm of this possibility. But today we work with partners in two ways. One, we're trying to enable people and help people build where they are by rolling out the same platform technologies that we use internally so that they can use them internally as well. We recognize the need to get these solutions out the door as quickly as possible. And that means we need the experts on the problems best equipped to create and deploy these solutions. And so that's where we want to put the power of effective sort of plant R&D in the hands of those people. So that's through our software system. And then we also, collaborate. Our real scientists come and work on projects collaboratively with partners who engage us to develop processes together.
Wow. So, you guys are doing these partnerships and clearly have clients, but a lot of startups, particularly in biotech or biomanufacturing, face the so-called valley of death between proof of concept and commercialization. You guys recently raised some money, maybe not so recently, you can correct me, but what convinced your investors that Foray could bridge the gap between that proof of concept and commercialization?
Yeah, I think first is we have a strong and constant vision to use biomanufacturing to protect and restore ecosystems. And we've been able to find investors who have strong alignment with that vision. And so they're really in it for the long haul, and they recognize, as we do, the potential of this technology to be transformative. The second is we have a business model that I feel makes sense given the state of maturity of the field. So if we're talking about this problem progression that needs to take place, we are creating that solution to the first problem that needs to be solved. So it makes sense, and we'll be able to sort of grow and expand our capabilities as the field continues to mature. And then there's a history of execution, and what we've been able to steadily show as we've been building over the last few years and just producing consistent results, I think builds confidence and trust with those investors that have been along for the ride. But again, I think we touched on this before. The unique thing I think about Foray is that where most others in the field are sort of product first, we are this sort of platform first company, and we recognize the importance of others being successful in order for this field to have the impact that we want it to have. So we have this sort of interesting partnership model where success doesn't mean we have success in one product, but it means that we are helping drive innovation across a wide range of products. And it maintains this optionality that sort of builds resiliency, I guess, into our business plan.
Yeah, I mean, I know, so the companies that we had on before, oftentimes they are building products to prove out their platform. So the companies that we've had on the past are doing that to showcase to the industry that, hey, look, this is how you can leverage our platform. And we've proven that we got costs down. And so when you first were talking about going from cell to seed, my mind was like, how long does that take? I'm just kind of curious to see how that plays out from a process and industrial point of view, because if you're selling to these companies, they're going to decide, if I want to make a bioactive or a fragrance, which process can get me that fragrance at the cheapest cost? And obviously the good quality, but the cost is always a factor. What do you think about that? How do you compare against cell-free and all these other types of methodologies to produce the fragrances? Are you saying you'd work with the cell-free companies, or are you going to kind of compete against them? It'd be good to know from an industrial standpoint, from a standpoint, how that looks to you.
Yeah. I mean, so we're not going to be selling fragrances, so we won't be direct competitors to those organizations. But the path that, we recognize plant cell culture has value in particular applications, and it's going to be outcompeted by other technologies and other applications. Yeah. And so you really do have to be able to do this realistic assessment of when is this the right tool for the job? And plant cells are valuable when it comes to producing really sort of complex products, whether those are really large and complicated molecules or complicated mixtures of molecules, or these obviously you're not producing plant embryos from yeast. And so these well-defined niches where plant cells and plant cell culture will be able to uniquely provide what the customer is looking for in order to get to a state where we can prove out that product can be produced in plant cell culture. That's the big mystery. That's the unknown today. We have 450,000 land plants in the world. And, we have experimented in cell culture with a tiny, tiny fraction of them, probably less than 1%, probably much less than 1%. That means there are all of these gaps in knowledge. Everything is high risk. And so how do you start to bring the risk down overall? How do you start to make these new endeavors more accessible and more cost effective? Because right now it's a lot of trial and error. It's super artisanal. People, like you said, you have to prove out that it works first. So you're throwing in tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars into this process to maybe come out with a successful prototype. Maybe you never even create a successful cell line. And that's a reality for a lot of the cell and tissue culture world in plants today. And so there are a whole lot of pieces along this production chain that require innovation for plant cells, because this is still a new field. So, going from 1 to 100 is hard, and there's a lot of innovation required there. But going from 0 to 1, that's a blocker. If you can't get to 1, you can't get to 100, and so that's where we're focused. How do you take an R&D timeline that can be 6 months or 20 years and cram it all down so the upper end of that timeline is always at 6 months, you know? So how do you make that R&D process reliable and accessible?
You know, one of the things that strikes me, Ashley, is I haven't said this in a while, but in our earlier podcast episodes, I used to say, you know, we need every solution everywhere all at once. And hearing you say this just kind of reminds me of that, because you've got these efforts that are like, we're planting 1 trillion trees or 1 billion trees, you know, and they're planting seedlings and the survival rate is very low, is what I understand. It's one thing to drop them out of an airplane and blanket unforested area with them, but you need every solution. You need your solution where you're bringing in seeds. You might need those tissue grown saplings, and you need to understand what the climate is going to do to that thing. And you guys seem to fit really nicely into that. When you think about like this entire infrastructure of plant products, what excites you the most about this kind of intersection between biology, forestry, and manufacturing or biomanufacturing?
Yeah, I think what excites me is, I mean, with this renewed enthusiasm around plants and our ecological systems and this understanding that, oh, actually, you know, we can't just extract, we have to manage these systems responsibly. We're starting to see all of these incredible emerging tools, like scientific tools, applied to understanding these systems. So from like the micro scale to the macro scale, our understanding of these plant systems and what they can do and what they need to survive is maturing at this really exciting rate. And I think, you know, when we start looking from the epigenetic or genetic level to the ecological level, and we have these sort of multiple perspectives coming together to examine these systems, I hope we'll start to appreciate these systems for what they are and understand them in ways that we never have been able to. We're starting to better understand, what does biodiversity really mean? You know, what makes a plant adaptable to its ecosystem? What makes an ecosystem resilient to changes in the climate? And so all amazing insights that are coming to fruition now, thanks to the new and emerging tools and the focus of really like dedicated people to this space. We have some friends, I'll just do a shameless plug for some of their cool work, but we have some friends at the University of Vermont, Dr. Steve Keller over there, and Dr. Matt Fitzpatrick over at the University of Maryland, who are building this incredible understanding of how forests are adapting in real time and like where in the environment these micro adaptations are happening, and how, you know, that knowledge can influence the seeds that we collect and where we use those seeds to have the most resilient and productive forests going into the future as our climates shift and migrate faster than our forests can. So this is just like one example of some of the cool work that's happening that I think will open the doors to some new ways of, you know, interacting with these ecosystems. So yeah, that's what I'm cautiously optimistic about all this engagement that's taking shape.
Yeah, I just love your perspective going from the genetic level to the ecosystem level. It's so vast, and these micro adaptations with a larger shift in climate rates, it's like, it's a lot. But now we're in a place where we have tools that are more accessible on the software side, like leveraging AI to be able to model things, get insights, generate, simulate, like all the things, and to be able to help collect insights across these scales. Tell us, like, I mean, I'm sure you're using software on many different processes, but where did you see the biggest leap in your process as you were leveraging? I'm assuming you're leveraging AI. We all are. You're talking about the scientists, this co-scientists. And what is it doing? Is it generating hypotheses? Is it creating experiments? Like, where do you see the most excitement in your world when it comes to using AI in your process or your platform?
Yeah, what's really exciting to me is, like we were just talking about, we have all this knowledge bubbling to the surface across scales, and it would be so infeasible for any one scientist to understand, like to link, oh, this genetic change here that is being studied for this purpose in the biotech space actually has these big ecological ramifications. And so what we can do with AI and these software tools is start to connect the dots between these, what seem like to an individual scientist focused on an individual goal, to be like remote data points or unrelated data. And we can start to like bring that together to create a more holistic understanding of how these systems and processes work. So that's one thing our software co-scientist is working to do is consolidate a lot of the knowledge that exists and contextualize it, help us connect these dots so that we can make more strategic decisions when it comes to R&D. So from this sort of literature synthesis and hypothesis research goals setting to like R&D management, how do I design better experiments when I'm trying to navigate these organisms that have some of the most complex genomes and also are controlled by 40, 50 different variables in these experiments. How do I navigate this space efficiently? And this is where being able to package these tools in a way that's accessible and useful to scientists who are doing work in the lab every day, like our scientists, can help everybody move more effectively in their lane of science. So that's kind of where we're excited about these tools. I do think there's something important about like creating a specific form factor for these tools and a specific like process flow for these tools that's really niche and specific to the area of science that you're working in, because science is not a monolith, and so if you're trying to build a process for science, you might, I don't know. I know there are many that are doing that and they're very effective, but I feel like plant science, often like we find the tools, they just don't work for us. It's just not right for our process. And so there needs to be a more targeted approach in this space. And so that's what we're working on delivering.
And how do you think these tools might compare to the tools that are developed or have been developed or are being developed, say, for agriculture? I know it's like probably people are more focused on like, how do I keep my crop of corn alive in Iowa this time of the year? What's the difference?
I'll preface this by saying I'm not an expert in all the software that exists in the agriculture space, but I think we're on this journey. We have some of these niche tools that have been developed for a really narrow, specific application. So, I'm sure the big agriculture crop breeding companies have their specific tools for understanding how this gene affects this trait, and they have a process that's sort of well structured to deliver that in the top 5 row crops or something. But beyond that, it's not really applicable. And so, or if you have, a farmer growing corn in the field, you might have a specific tool designed for that to help advise them on when to fertilize or when to water. It's not a broad plant science tool. But then on the other hand, I feel like we've sort of like ping-ponged to the other side, where now we have a bunch of like really generalist science tools coming out. And for certain aspects of science, maybe that will be useful, literature review. But when it comes to helping us design better experiments and do better science, like what the requirements are there are going to vary depending on, what field you're in, what type of science you're doing. And so, yeah, I think we're going to probably find ourselves as a field of scientists working in AI sort of migrating back to this middle ground where there's like some loose structure, some more structure to really satisfy our specific needs.
Yeah. And agriculture is oftentimes monoculture, where you're looking at diversity and you're looking at, again, large ecosystems. If we had, another 20 minutes, I'll talk about how you look at the soil microbiomes and, how does that all take that into consideration when developing seeds. But you're in this role, you're hitting this organization. What does the world look like for you in 5 to 10 years? Like, what was Foray doing? What impact has it had? Let's visioneer.
In 5 to 10 years, I want every plant scientist working in bioproduction and agriculture and forestry and academia to be building more effectively because they're working with Foray's new plant operating system.
Ooh,
and so
like that.
We want to be powering the next innovations in plant biology and like helping to accelerate the field towards the solutions that we need and the timeframes that we need them. So so that we can start to build this regenerative system for humans and for plants. And so, I would invite anybody who hears this call into the wild, if you're thinking about this too and like how to build better in this space and accelerate plant science, let's talk, let's think together about this, because this is a big challenge.
That's amazing.
Plants in space too. Let's not forget space.
Oh yeah, plants in space. Yeah.
you had to bring the space in there.
You got to think about on the, what does it what happens in zero gravity? What is that? Because we talked to Evan Bayer about cultivating mycelium in, zero gravity, and that's completely different. biology accelerates.
Yeah.
The replication of cells accelerates in zero gravity. We just came off of going to SynBio Beta, and that was one big key takeaway. I'm like, oh, things grow faster, biology moves faster in zero gravity. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I always like to throw that in.
It's wild. Yeah, there's so much we don't. I mean, there's so much we don't know. There's so much we don't know on this planet. Yeah. And then when you leave this planet, the world is your oyster. Can you still say that if you're in outer space?
Yeah.
But,
So to kind of close things out, Ashley, if someone asks, why should I care about plant cell culture? What do you say to them?
Yeah, I think we have plants to thank for the air we breathe, for the food we eat, the houses we live in, the fuels that power us. So plants are life. And the only way to sustain that life is by changing the extraction equation. So we need to take less and we need to plant more. And it's a simple equation, but plant cell culture can do that for us. Plant cell culture can help us grow better. That's why it matters. And I always say to people, like whether you know it or not, you are a plant person. So, we're all plant people.
Yes, we're all plant people. I can't wait to learn more about Foray, see what you guys are doing, especially in California, the biodiversity. I'm thinking of commercial applications. That's just me. I would love to have more diverse plants in my house, not just pothos plants. There's more house plants instead of pothos plants. But it's incredible speaking with you, learning more. I'm just very inspired. Thank you so much for coming on the Grow Everything podcast, Ashley.
Likewise. Yeah. Thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun.
Hey.
Thanks, Ashley. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
Hey, this episode is sponsored by Messaging Lab. At Messaging Lab, we translate complex science and economics into compelling business narratives. And we have done so for the most successful biotech-forward companies across pharma, agriculture, personal care and beauty, materials, and the list goes on. We're here to make sure your ideas not only get heard, but resonate with your audience. So if it's time to amplify your company's voice and elevate your business, visit us at messaginglab.com. Let's grow. Again, thank you so much for listening. We would love for you to join us on Substack. We have been sharing amazing stories that we talk about here on the podcast delivered to your inbox. So sign up for Substack and follow Grow Everything. Thank you.
Have a happy holiday and enjoy your time with your family, friends, or by yourself. That's the pod.